There we go. Hi, and welcome to the first workshop that we're doing. Super excited to get this started. We have Marianne with us, who is going to speak to us about social inclusion in sport. She is an expert in the field. So she's going to talk for maybe 20 minutes and show us a short film, and then we can have some discussion. Marianne, the scene is yours.
Thank you. I start sharing my screen. Hopefully it's gonna work. Yeah, let me know if everybody sees it properly. All's good?
You're good.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I'm Marian Bardos-Bencsik, a pastime curler from Hungary and occasionally a member of the WCF media team at World Events. And hopefully I'm going to continue it once we are going to have events again. But till then, I'm still doing my doctoral research in the University of Physical Education in Hungary, Budapest. And my research topic is how to use sport for positive social change, including social inclusion. And once I've learned about this very promising global initiative from Lajos, from Team Qatar, I immediately wanted to join it. And I asked Sarah and Monica, how can I join? And they said, well, you're in. And how about holding a presentation? I was like, okay, that was quick, but why not? Because actually, this is my favorite topic, and talking about my favorite topic and the social aspects of curling, like my favorite sport and my favorite topic combined, I cannot imagine a better opportunity to spread the word about my research. So today I'm just gonna go through a couple of concepts that we are using in research when it comes to sport for good. And then I would love to hear your ideas or your probably already existing practices in the area. And of course, I'm really up for any questions that might come my way. So, the first concept that is actually the title of my presentation is the social inclusion in and through sport term that is mostly used in European Union documents. That's why it's slightly difficult to understand, because this is how policy documents are communicating on an EU level.
Sorry, Marianne, can I interrupt you? Can everyone see the PowerPoint? Okay. Yeah, it looks like it's just on the folder or the file explorer, but it hasn't opened the PowerPoint yet.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah.
Let me see, because it says, at least to me, it says I'm sharing my screen, but let me try to do it.
Maybe we'll try that method that we tried before.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm gonna do. Sorry about this.
No, sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. Okay, so let's go back to the start. Yeah. Okay, I'm opening the presentation. Please let me know if you can see it. I'm putting it on full screen. Do you see it now? No.
No.
It's so typical. We had a test run before everyone.
Exactly, like half an hour ago. Then how about doing this, Monica? Like, you open it, you share your screen, and I will just tell you when to jump the slides. Now I cannot hear you.
Yeah, sorry, give me one.
Or if that doesn't work, I can try it one more time with a new share.
Okay. I have it as a PDF, so it may be slightly different format, but
No,
you try.
it should be fine. It's the same.
Okay.
Yes, so thanks for this. So we are on the second slide, and it's actually an extract from a European Union document about the definition of these two terms that are combined in most of these documents. So the inclusion in sport and the inclusion through sport. Practically, inclusion in sport or in curling means that everybody is given the opportunity to practice that sport. Let's say the curling rink is wheelchair accessible, so wheelchair users can practice there as well. This is inclusion in sport. While inclusion through sport means something slightly different. It actually means using sport as a tool or a stage to include people in society that might be at risk of marginalization. So for instance, imagine a group of newly arrived migrants in your community and you setting up a curling-based program for them with a buddy system. So let's say you pair up a newly arrived migrant person to a curling community member, and the curling community member can introduce them to the curling life in your community, in your ice rink, in your club, and probably even to social life in a broader extent. So this is inclusion through sport. So these two terms combined are actually used in European Union funding schemes and documents. This is the first concept. Then if you jump, please, Monica, to the third slide, it's another concept, a way broader one that I'm actually researching. And I was super fortunate to work with it already with WCF at last year's World Men's Curling Championships. So it's the concept of sport for development and peace, practically meaning using sport or all kinds of physical activities to contribute to reaching the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So these are 17 global goals, such as ending world hunger or quality education for everyone or fighting climate change. And right now, it's such a well-recognized topic or movement in the global sport and development stage that since 2014, there's an observation day of the UN which recognizes sports contribution to these goals. And it's celebrated on the 6th of April each year, mostly through social media campaigns, especially this year. But this is like the first step how a sports organization or any sort of organization can join the campaign. This is the easiest, to make some photos, to make some short videos and post them on social media channels. But of course, there are many other ways to contribute to this awareness raising campaign, such as with programs, conferences, and so on. So what we did with WCF was that we asked 17 plus 1 players to pose with the 17 global goal icons for a photo shoot. And the plus 1 player was Oscar Eriksson, who was posing with all 17 goals. And this is what you can see on this picture. And of course, the whole gallery is available on WCF's social media channels. So this is a concept that is broadly used globally. Right now, there are more than, let's say, 1,000 organizations working with this, who are part of such a global network, which are gathering at a social media page for the movement. It's called the International Platform on Sport and Development, sportanddev.org, where people are sharing best practices or different tools on how they use sport to contribute to these goals. And I hope that one day WCF will contribute even more than joining this campaign on a yearly basis. If we go to the next slide, I will introduce the last concept just to think a little bit out of the box in terms of how many ways can we use curling, can we use a sport to create positive social change, such as social inclusion. It's the concept of Professor Fred Coulter, who actually said that we can talk about sport plus and plus sport programs depending on the relative role that sport plays in such a program. So for instance, sport plus programs are those initiatives where sport is in the center of the program, but there's something additional to it. Therefore, it's not simply, let's say, a grassroots sport program, but it's a sport for education program, a sport for inclusion program, a sport for prevention program, or anything like this. For instance, if you have a curling program for young people, let's say a midnight curling club in an area where youngsters are at risk of committing crimes, then it's a sport for a curling for prevention program. And because curling is in the center of your program and you want to reach some sort of additional development goals with it, that's why it's a sport plus program. However, on the other side of the spectrum, there are many organizations which are not specialized in sport, let's say international relief organizations, think about the Red Crescent societies, or UN agencies, who are first responders in, let's say, post-war settings or post-natural disaster settings. And once they arrive there, of course, their primary goal is to set some sort of new normal in the area, providing clean water, shelter, food, safety. But at some point, they can include sport in their activities, for instance, for children, to get their minds out, of the situation they are currently in, just to make them escape a little bit from their daily struggles. So obviously in these programs, sport is an additional item to the program. That's why it's called plus sport. And of course, as it's a spectrum, you can really create your curling programs depending on how much emphasis is on curling, and then on other tools to create such a social change. And once we know these concepts, it's really good to talk about, to say some critical things about great ideas that probably you already have in mind, or at least when I started working with these concepts, I had tons of amazing ideas in mind. And of course, a lot of them failed because I wasn't really aware of how many things I really need to pay attention to. So if we go to the next slide, there are a couple of ideas to really consider once we establish a curling program for some sort of positive social change. So for instance, especially if you are working as an expat in a different country, you need to know the local context. If you would like to establish anything for local people, you need to know the cultural settings, the cultural needs. And it goes hand in hand with carrying out a needs assessment, because even if you have a great idea how to, let's say, provide curling opportunities in the daytime for elderly people in your neighborhood, what if there are no elderly people there? What if they are already engaged in other activities, or they are just simply not interested in curling? Then your idea practically fails, because there's no need for such an initiative. And the third point, it's actually based on the needs assessment. Once you have a target group and you know their needs, it's really important to co-establish the program with them, so it will actually fulfill their needs the best way it can. And the other two items on this list, again, go hand in hand. It's the sustainability of your Curling for Social Change program, and then monitoring it and evaluating it. because especially if you are working with groups who are at risk of marginalization, it's really important that the program doesn't stop once your funding cycle is over, once your project cycle is over, because it's a horrible thing to trigger something, make people feel included, welcomed, and then let them alone once, you know, the volunteer hours are over, the funding is over, and the ICE time is over. So you need to create your exit strategy in a way to make sure that there's some sort of continuation of the program. And it can be done, of course, with some project management tools. You might know about monitoring and evaluation. You need to follow your program and every now and then check it, receive feedback from all people involved, check if it's in line with your budget, if you have some. And of course, at the end of it, you need to evaluate it, need to make sure you get as much feedback as possible. It's mostly required if you're working with sponsors, but even if not, it's very much, it's really not a nice to have, it's a must have to make sure that your program is properly finished and it's ready for some improvements to be made. And it can only be done if you follow it up properly. So the last slide just contains a couple of references that I've used. And of course, if you would like to have any sort of resources in this area, I'm really, really happy to provide with you because I have a lot. And before we start really thinking and sharing ideas and exchanging practices of how you use curling or how you would like to use curling to create some positive social change in your communities, I would like to show you a small clip, which is around, I think, 10 years old, but it's really showing how we can think a little bit out of the box when it comes to using sport for the benefit of society or for any developmental objectives at large. So if Monica, if you could please try to start the video, which is in the folder as well, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, press and play.
Soccer is the world's favorite game. In some countries, it's even a way of life. Growing up, Jessica Matthews knew this, spending holidays in Nigeria where her family is from. But she was also exposed to another part of Nigerian life, frequent power failures.
I think for me, it really hit a point of frustration, I recall, when I was at my aunt's wedding. And that day, I remember we lost power. And so outside of my aunt's house, we had a diesel generator running. And I remember feeling like I was choking. And so it wasn't just the fact that everyone was experiencing this that was really something that was unsettling, but the fact that everyone was so complacent. Everyone was just so used to it, and they had no feeling or belief that they could do something to change the situation.
Fast forward a few years, and Matthews, a junior in college, is assigned a group project to resolve any issue with art or science.
You take the most popular sport in the world, soccer, and you take one of the biggest issues around the world, energy access, clean energy access, and you say, we're going to take something you love to do anyway and make it something that actually gives you utility afterwards.
The college project, a soccer ball that stores kinetic energy generated by kicking it, then uses that energy to power a light, made so much sense to Matthews that she and another member of her team, Julia Silverman, decided to turn it into a company called Uncharted Play.
It's about educating people about clean energy, about renewable energy, about self-sustaining energy, and doing so in a way that makes sense to them.
In a world where 2.6 billion people do not have access to reliable electricity, the ball, named the socket, could be a real solution to this problem.
You have this pendulum that's turning,
so that's moving.
Yeah, as the ball is turning. This mechanism, or rather I should say this pendulum, turns a generator, which powers a battery, and then stores that power that you can utilize later when you need it.
After playing soccer for 30 minutes, you plug an LED lamp into the bowl and get 3 hours of light. President Obama got a personal demonstration on his recent visit to Africa.
You play with this for a few hours, and now you've got a half hour's worth of light.
No, 30 minutes of play,
30 minutes of
several
light,
hours of light.
Several hours of light, or you can now plug in Charge your cell phone. And you can charge your cell phone. So that's pretty creative. We're going to start getting these all around Africa, right?
Yes. The company has also received praise from the likes of Oprah and former President Bill Clinton.
It's quite extraordinary, really. You know, kick a ball, turn on a light.
Once the socket comes on the market later this year, purchasing a bowl and a lamp here in the US will automatically give a bowl and a lamp to a child overseas. As the socket reaches more people across the world, Jessica hopes it will inspire more people here to do good.
We really want it to be the spark. You see this and you say, if this is possible, I think I have a good idea about what else just might be possible now.
Jessica Hartogs, CBSNews.com.
Thank you. And yeah, actually, this would be my invitation to this conversation. Like, think about what might be possible with curling when it comes to creating social change, creating inclusion opportunities for groups who are at risk of marginalization. And like, I open the floor for discussion. And of course, if you have any questions about my presentation, I'm all ears. Don't be shy.
Thank you, Marianne. That was really interesting. It's a perspective that I haven't actually really thought about for curling before, but it's definitely something that has come up in the US in discussions recently, kind of thinking about the club format of curling clubs and how curling clubs kind of interact with their local communities. And I think currently a lot of clubs might find that they're not actually really interacting with their local community all that much. But as your presentation kind of discussed, like that's a great way to rethink what the purpose of sport is in the community and rethink how the curling club can interact with the community.
Yeah, totally, actually.
And I wanted to ask the group if anyone kind of had an example of a curling club that was doing anything interacting with their local community right now in a way that's kind of unorthodox or different from just being a curling club.
Monica, is it okay if I speak? Yeah, okay. There's a documentary, and I think it was Daryl who introduced me to this documentary, and it was about North Africans moving to Italy and being integrated into the community using curling. And I don't know if you've seen the documentary, or it's actually, you probably haven't seen the documentary because he's the director. What's his name here? Hold on. I've been conversing with him a little bit. Tommaso Clavarino. He's trying to actually get it into theaters, but he couldn't because of the pandemic. So we're working with him a little bit to see if we can help and maybe get it out to the curling community. But if you're interested, I could share my screen if I can, and I can show you the trailer for it anyways, if that would interest everybody. And you can see what the Italians have done, and you'll recognize possibly some of the people in the video because they are some of the national team members. And it was all done in Pinerolo, where they tried to integrate these Africans into the community using the sport. So should I try to share here if I can? It says I can.
Able to.
Okay, perfect. Here we go. So it's here. Can you see that now? Yeah. Okay. I'll hit play.
Can't hear the sound.
No? Okay, it's just music right now. Okay, was everybody able to see that and you could read the subtitles? Yeah, okay. So when you were doing your presentation, Marianne, I was thinking of this project that the Italians took on and integrating people who have been displaced in their country and using curling as a tool of something to help them. Oh, I got more people talking now, and hold on. How do I stop this? Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'll share that link with everybody. Can I share it through Zoom? I guess I can, can't I?
You can send it in the chat if you want, Scott.
I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. So you can use that as inspiration, I think.
Yeah, it's absolutely a perfect example of actually inclusion through curling, which newly arrived migrants and refugees, it's like a hot topic now, especially in Europe, and we use all sorts of sports across Europe to create this sort of inclusion, but I've never heard about using curling for it. It's pretty extraordinary. I'm really curious how they do it in practice and how much they can actually interact with the local people, probably having some language barriers as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the movie.
Yeah, it's I feel bad for the producer because of what's happened. He's put all this time into this video, which I found to be quite fascinating. We actually proposed it for an award for Peace and Sport organization. They have an award process, but it didn't make it to the next level, unfortunately. But I haven't seen anything in our sport either where we've been able to use our sport, because a lot of the times sports such as soccer are much easier to use because it's warm. All you need is a ball and somebody goes outside. With curling, it's much more difficult to go in and be in that cold environment. Yeah, but if you're, Marianne, if you're interested though, you should reach out to the producer. He's quite engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. I will. And if you have any sort of programs when you use curling for any kind of, contribution to development goals, I really, really recommend going for these sorts of like funding schemes and award schemes. Like I can send you a bunch of ideas, a bunch of links. I'm very familiar with Peace and Sport and their award scheme, and actually what they've done a couple of years ago to create awareness around this International Day of Sport for Development and Peace, their so-called White Card campaign. Even WCF was part of it a couple of years ago. So they are pretty big players in this scheme, and usually they have like a lot of entries to their award ceremony. So yeah, if you have anything, really spread the word about your projects with entering these sorts of awards. Beyond Sport it's another organization. Laurel Sports Foundation has these sorts of schemes, and of course they provide sometimes funding for these things as well. So they are always looking for new initiatives, new ideas, new sports, and I haven't really seen curling entering into such either awards or funds. So that's pretty cool that they've done that, and it's too bad that they didn't make it to the last round.
Marianne, do you have any other examples from other sports that you think that curling can learn from and that we could try?
Yeah, I think it's more like that. That's why actually I showed the video, that I know it's really hard to, like, let's say, sell curling. We all know that. And I also know how hard it is to sell this concept of using sport to create some sort of social change, because many people who are really focusing on their sport, they don't really focus on anything else. Let's say any additional values that sport participation can bring to the table other than socializing or winning medals or learning about team play and stuff. And on the other hand, there are a lot of skeptical groups of people who are really working hard in development or in sociology or psychology, trying to create change, and they really need to be convinced that sport or curling can be used as a tool for this. So actually this last video that we've seen, it's really just to how to use our brain to work with this concept. And I mean, there are plenty of things. I remember once I was, for instance, doing an internship in Cambodia, where after the Pol Pot regime, which practically destroyed Cambodian society as such, killing 1/4 of the population, they needed to reestablish physical education simply because they didn't have intellectuals anymore, because they were the target group of the mass killings. And once they reestablished public education as such, obviously and unfortunately, physical education wasn't the first among those to be reintroduced. So it's actually a really multi-stakeholder consortium which started with external funding to re-establish physical education in Cambodian schools. And it's in a way a sport for development concept, because those kids wouldn't have been exposed to such a thing as regular structured physical activity if such a program wouldn't exist. And now I think the last time, when I was there, it was 2014. They've run it in around 5 provinces, and they used this train the trainer concept to spread it within the provinces from one school to other schools, and then spreading it across Cambodia. So for instance, it's not even sport, but simple physical education that can contribute to just general education of people who might not have it otherwise. Anyone else who's trying to use curling a little bit for a little bit more than either high level or grassroots level sport for sport's sake? You can really think about how your curling community members are working with or practicing with wheelchair curlers or deaf curlers, or probably the senior curlers if they need any assistance or anything to be able to practice your sport.
Thanks, Marianne. It's Brody from Curling Canada. Love the presentation. In particular, I oversee Curling Canada's philanthropic program, and it's a fairly young program in the sense that it's about 6 years old now. And our focus is really on youth in sport. And I know Chad will be able to pipe in on some of this, but one of the things that we're doing, and I would say it's on a sort of a smaller scale than sort of national social change, if you will, but is working to increase what we call the philanthropic impact of our program. So to date, we've been raising funds and investing in youth curling across the country, but it's predominantly targeting kids that are involved in our sport, and how we can sort of expand those programs, or the scholarship program, how we can support them in their journey within the sport. And in particular, we're really trying to start investing in reaching kids that otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity. That's kind of the baseline of where we're trying to use specifically the Rocks and Rings program that we run in our partnership with Rock Solid Productions with Chad, to ensure that, in our new agreement, which is not totally announced, but I think I can say it here. Chad, give me a thumbs up. Yeah, okay. We've committed and agreed to significant investments in each year of the next 4 years of our agreement to ensure that we are offering, basically at no cost resources to schools and community organizations that otherwise wouldn't have it. And we're in the process of developing out what year 1 looks like as the pilot. But and it's gonna require us partnering with, to your point of sort of knowing the local, getting that local sense and that feeling. We're partnering, with not only Rock Solid Productions with Chad, but we're looking at partnering with, say, Boys and Girls Clubs. Or some of the sort of organizations that are on the ground that are tapped into the demographic of youth that aren't necessarily being able to participate in sport. And then how do we partner with them, to sort of deliver those resources with the added complication of COVID and how everything's closing down, and how do we look at taking things outdoors and indoors. But that's one of the things we're doing, and it's a long-term strategy and priority for our philanthropic program. And so we're sort of starting with some of these pilots and would just absolutely love to then branch out to each of our member associations and have some more targeted initiatives at sort of marginalized or at risk youth, if you will, in each of our provinces across Canada. I'll flip that to Chad in case he wants to expand on it.
No, I think you summed it up perfectly right there. I get the floor in a couple weeks, so I won't talk much now.
I would then have a question about the program. So how did you identify the target groups? Like, who are those at-risk youth, or why do you think they are at risk? Do
you want to take this one, Chad? Because I think you probably nailed it more at why do we think. Certainly working with at youth risk isn't Curling Canada's specialty, isn't my specialty. So, we were narrowing it, which is why it was important to us to either target, far sort of Indigenous communities that are so far out that they're not sort of tapping in regularly to resources or to the programs that are happening in the more sort of urban areas. And then on the flip side, targeting quite inner city areas where we know that the demographic is incredibly diverse and income, socioeconomical income levels are sort of more variant, if you will. And that's why, and then partnering with the Boys and Girls Clubs as an example of an organization that we might would be one where, they're already working with youth that come from sort of a home that maybe doesn't necessarily have the same sort of household income that can afford to have them in sports or have some of that leadership. So that's sort of how we identified, at least for this year one, of where we would sort of attempt to make some partnerships and see if you're right, like if we are going to reach those that we intend to reach and support kids that otherwise wouldn't have this opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's quite an important thing, like quite an important point that you made about the partnerships, because probably Curling Canada itself wouldn't have been able to reach out to all those target groups, but through an organization like the Boys and Girls Clubs, who are working with them anyway, I think it's a really, really wise step to take.
Well, thank you. And I won't discount Rock Solid Production in this, because they've actually been the ones working with Boys and Girls Clubs in Saskatoon or in Nova Scotia. They've been doing this for years through the school program and through sort of the floor curling. And so it really was a lot of, their leadership, and will continue to be there. They have the relationships with these organizations. And so we'll be relying on them to sort of make those first connections and find the champion on the ground to really run with this. So, but again, Chad will be speaking about this in a couple of weeks.
Awesome. And speaking of, all these like COVID restrictions, and given the fact that our sport, we don't have proper ice rinks across the globe everywhere, like how do you adapt your curling programs in order to reach larger groups, using like different amendments to curling, let's say, like e-curling and, curling on the frozen lake and all these sorts of things. Because like for us, I think that's the hard part, that for example, in Hungary, we have a 2-sheet curling ice on the edge of the capital city, and really, really hard to get there if you don't have a car. So it's like really a challenge to introduce the sport for sport's sake to people who might not be able to access the ring, let alone adding some additional developmental aspects to curling programs, at least in Hungary.
You also said, Marianne, that you would like curling to do more when talking about the 17 different goals. What is it that you would like to see curling do and become?
Wow, can I dream big? Well, I think for me, it's really important I really am daydreaming right now, but I think it would be cool if WCF could really take the lead on being on the forefront of such campaigns. These April 6 celebrations on the International Day of Sport for Development and Peace, it's pretty much a given. Like the IOC would like international federations to do it, because right now the IOC is in direct partnership with the United Nations, and basically they are trying to spread the word around this sport for social good message together. So that's why, of course, the IOC is doing its part by reaching out to the IFs to encourage them to promote, for example, this International Day. But I feel like it's great that if an IF is taking part in social media campaigns, but there are so much more that can be done. For instance, establishing commission within WCF, working with the team, or holding an online conference under the name of WCF, or showcasing these examples that we've just heard from Curling Canada, or you know, this movie and stuff like this, like really being like the poster, sort of like the advertising board behind such a mission. For example, what I've seen with other IFs when I was doing my research, many of them have various communities, various commissions or councils working specifically with these topics. For instance, the International Judo Federation, IJF, they have a program called Judo for Peace, and they are partnering up, for example, with this aforementioned Peace and Sport organization, and running Judo for Peace programs in some African countries, and organizing games such as the Friendship Games among countries that are otherwise in war, or they are in a post-war settings, and they would like to bring their youth together, of course, with all safety measures taken. I mean, we are talking about COVID-less times now, and using the sport of judo to teach them fair play and teamwork and all sorts of things, and having additional educational elements to those programs, practically just showing them that even though their countries have been enemies, like in real situation, it doesn't affect the fact that they are, as individuals, as judokas on the mat, they can regard each other as opponents, and then off the mat as friends. So it's like a really basic concept, and it's fully endorsed by the International Judo Federation, for instance.
Marianne, can I ask you, I know in Peace and Sport, I received their annual review every year, and I went through the last two, and there's not one picture of winter sports in it at all. Do you have any examples of winter sports that are able to do these things? I know it's more difficult for winter.
Let me think. I think I once read something around ice hockey, but I cannot recall what, but if I find something, I will share it on our common drive for sure. But once I was going through these around 1,000 organizations using sport to create social change, I don't recall too many winter sports organizations really being registered on this social platform of good practice sharing, for sure. Yeah, that's, I guess, of course, because it's way more challenging for winter sports to exist and to be practiced as such, and then adding this bonus element to it to create some sort of change with it, it's even harder. But I will definitely have a look at it for sure.
Okay, thank you. It is difficult in it's a challenge for winter sports because of the environment, I think, is the biggest thing. So any help that we can get, or any examples of other sports would be great.
Yeah, that's why I'm like so much looking forward to the movie, but because practically it can be done with whatever sport, because sport is such an easy to use tool, because it creates like a common ground and an easy to understand each other sort of field. And of course, ideally, it's a level playing field. But it's true that once you have an idea to use sport to, let's say, work with at-risk youth, or with migrant communities, or with people with some sort of mental challenges or physical challenges, you probably wouldn't go directly to winter sports, but then first go to football or soccer, or something way easier to implement. Anything else? If not, I'm just sharing, like, probably it's like an anecdote or something, but I don't know how it is in other countries, but in Hungary, we have a really, really small curling community, probably like 100 players who are really active. And basically it's a two-sheeter ice rink, the exactly same ice rink where our world champions train. This is where we have these taster sessions for company employees. Everything's happening at the same place. And it's really, really cool that we have two teams who are consisting of players who are completely deaf. They don't hear anything, and they have hearing coaches, obviously volunteering, enthusiastic pastime curlers who took up the role to coach them, and they went to the Deaf Olympics and all these events that they can. And they also participate in our regular national championships. And it's so interesting to see that even though it's pretty hard for us, in broomstackings to communicate with each other, but, we just invent some signing, and this is what their coaches do as well. Actually, some coaches learned a couple of proper sign language signs to communicate with them. And it just shows the power of how they can be included if really everybody takes that little effort to communicate with them, even though it's a little bit harder than you would do it with everyone else. Anyone else? Any stories, any ideas, any challenges that you face in your already existing curling programs? Or any programs that came to a halt due to COVID?
I was also wondering, you said in the beginning you had a lot of ideas and of projects to try, but you hadn't learned like all of the factors that you need to have in place in order to be successful. Could you share any of those? Like, is there anything we could learn from there?
Oh yeah, actually it's a funny thing, because I start with not a personal example and then I will go really personal with this. So when I conducted my interviews for my doctoral research, I actually asked my interviewees, who are all working in this area on different levels, to please share bad practices with me. I told them that I'm not interested in names or any specific details, but really things that did not work, because this is what we can learn from, right? And they were really, really shy with actually portraying the bad examples, unfortunately. They were saying some vague things like, yeah, partnerships are important, and yeah, needs assessment, like the things that I've mentioned in the beginning of this really, really basic presentation. But I would have actually expected a little bit more, because if I faced some really hard challenges, I'm sure that they did as well, but they didn't really share. But yeah, my example was that the Swiss Academy for Development, it's a research and also practice-based organization based in Biel in Switzerland. They were running a social inclusion program for migrants. And actually two Hungarian organizations, both of them are NGOs, not working in sport, found a funding scheme, a Swiss funding scheme, and found this example as a project example. And they teamed up with the Swiss Academy for Development to practically amend the program to Hungarian settings and to run it in Hungary. And it was like way before the migrant crisis, so it was around 2013. So there were not a lot of migrants in Hungary that much to start with. And I jumped on board because I've overheard from somewhere that there's a program starting to run. And pretty much I was the only one in the program who was aware of Hungarian sport on any level. So they didn't gather proper experts to actually run the program. They were not really able to reach out to the target population, schools and school kids being interested in sport with a migrant background. So actually, honestly, it was purely based on luck that I was there and I could make some sort of connections, but obviously the project was destined to fail anyways because we didn't have a proper target group. I remember that I was spreading the word. Actually, it was Zsolt Kis's dad, who was the general secretary of the Hungarian Curling Association for many years. He simply overheard me talking about this at the ring, and he was like, yeah, probably it might be interesting for us. And somehow Zsolt ended up being on a couple of workshops of ours. So he was one of those, let's say, 5 sports professionals who could actually join this train the trainer sort of workshop series, because we were just simply not able to gather any interest, because sports clubs in Hungary at that time were not really interested in welcoming people with migrant backgrounds, which would have meant them putting an extra effort into their programs, let's say overcoming language barriers and introducing a buddy system or things like this. So basically, we got a ton of money for this program. We translated a Swiss manual of best practices or a guide or something. We went on to this big sports day, which was like a sports day with schools bringing kids there to try different sports. But our program wasn't really promoting any sport. It was promoting a concept which was not really relevant to the Hungarian settings. So that was purely zero needs assessment, zero experts in it. And we spend a lot of money and there's no impact on it. Of course, our website is not running anymore. Our Facebook page is dead. There's no continuity. And I don't think that we've actually reached people who might even remember that program today. Yeah, that was a failure.
Thank you for sharing that.
No problem. Happy to share if it can be of anyone's benefit.
Does anyone else have a question or an example that they want to share or ask about?
Especially bad examples are welcome.
No? It's very quiet to have a workshop when people can mute themselves.
I had 2 questions, more administrative things. Scott, I was wondering if you could find that full documentary anywhere online and share with us. Is that possible, or is it not out yet?
He's looking for the distribution rights.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay.
So they're trying to make money off of it right now. So unfortunately, I can't share it.
Yeah.
But I think if somebody like Marianne went to him, I'm sure he might share the link so that you can get a better understanding. There was one thing that happened here in Canada. I hate using Canada as an example just because we're so big, right, in the sport. But there was a play that was out last year, and I'm sure it's probably not out this year just because of the conditions we're in, but it was called the Great Canadian Curling Club. And it was about a curling club in the north of Canada where there wasn't a lot to do. And the immigrants that were living in the community decided that they were going to form a curling team and try to assimilate themselves into the community. I went to the first one of the first showings of it, and it was in a small community in Ontario. But then it spread right across Canada. So it's been in Calgary, I believe, and it's been in a couple other communities. It was really well done, but it was the arts picking up on sport and then basically showing us how inclusive the sport could be. And it was about the trainer that was the ice technician as well. but he was an old guy who'd been around the sport forever and had all the old concepts and ideas. He wasn't used to working with people that were not white, essentially. And it was a really well done play, and showed that. Unfortunately, I don't think it's being in production this year just because of COVID, and there's probably no live productions. But that's another example. If you look it up, there's quite a few articles about the play talking about it. So I would recommend that one too. And then also, I don't know if Chad, were you involved in the Syrian refugees in Toronto? Or Brody?
That was at my club, but no, I was not directly involved in that one. But I know we've done other things like that. Maybe not so much for new migrants, but like for the Brazilian community in Toronto, events like that. And then, I mean, the big challenge we have with events like that is we get great response, but then it's hard to find actual programming within the club, especially in a big urban center like Toronto, where there's so much demand on the ice time. It's hard to then assimilate them into any regular league play or programs after that. But it was very well received, and one of the things that we're talking about with Brody, or that Brody was talking about earlier, we'll be involving groups like that are basically for newcomers to the country.
Awesome. Sport for inclusion programs. Great.
And I believe, as you said, Marianne, too, there's a lot of funding out there too. All the way from the IOC down to local governments to help with that.
Well, I'm not sure about the IOC funding. I more know about these wealthy, influential sport for development organizations and foundations, such as Beyond Sport or Laureus or Peace in Sport. But I can easily send a couple of links or create a Google document with links to those to be shared in the folder.
Yeah, that was my next question, Marianne. You said you had a lot of resources, and honestly, anything you'd be willing to put in that share drive is great. We'll take it for sure.
Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you very much. It's been an hour. So if anyone else does anyone have a final question for Marianne?
If not, you can always reach out to me through this group or anything. Really happy to discuss this topic forever.
Yes, please do. Thank you so much for getting this group and this workshop series started. I'm very excited that we are starting. And in about a week, we have Raju. Do you want to drop a teaser or something, Raju, to make sure that people want to join when we have a workshop to create our different charters?
Sure. I think this is going to be the first time I'm going to be talking about like trying to create a charter or a diversity and inclusion statement. So the idea was to have a workshop with all the participants like chipping in, like working together to create different aspects of a charter and a diversity statement. So I'm looking forward to it next week.
So are we. And please, if you want to join next week, then let us know, because we will be sending out some material for participants to prepare before the workshop. So make sure that we know that you're joining so that we can send you the material beforehand. Marianne, this has been great. Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for joining.
Thanks for the opportunity. It was my pleasure, really.
Thank you.